Hello guys, my name is Anna and I'm a Ukrainian, and I have decided I will vlog daily from my country Ukraine since the start of this awful war with Russia. And in my daily videos I try to tell you the information that we Ukrainians consider important, and also to provide you with some facts from our history, our culture, and I'm always grateful for your questions because they inspire me a lot. And today I have decided to answer one of these questions about decommunization, and that is a very important process, and those of you who are into post-Soviet history definitely have heard about it. And I have decided to film outside because the weather is beautiful, it is finally warm, and I have picked a more or less Soviet building as my background. It is one of the buildings of our national university. I have been inside as a student, I have been inside as a teacher, and today I have thought it will be a more or less nice background to illustrate the Soviet era, but definitely this is one of the nice examples, not the traditional Khrushchevkas, which I can show you one day, but I'm a person who likes beautiful things, so I doubt whether I should. So, decommunization is a process when communist ideology, communist monuments and communist messages started to finally disappear from the independent states. And I know it is not only a characteristic of my country Ukraine, but of many others who suffered Soviet occupation, like Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, Romania and many others. And for Ukraine, it all started in the 90s when we became independent, and lots of these theoretical aspects of communism disappeared from schools and universities. I have not been a pioneer or a zhovtenятко, which is for small children at school, because I have I went to school when it was already independent Ukraine, but we still had some books on history that our teachers asked to skip a couple of pages, because for a long period of time we had really poor years and it was pretty difficult to get new books and stuff like that. So many of us witnessed these things everywhere. Then the real process of decommunization, that is the banning of the Communist Party, that is the banning of many communist laws, took place in Ukraine really late. Please forgive, the road is near. Really late, as in 2013, just when the Euromaidan started, we had a very interesting phenomenon that was called Lenin fall. In Ukrainian it sounds Leninopad, and it's very typical, just like 1 month in our calendar we have November, and we call November leaves fall. So that was Leninopad, because lots and lots, hundreds of monuments to Lenin disappeared, including our capital Kyiv. In my region we destroyed them long ago, perhaps when I was very small, so I don't remember much of that. But in Kyiv, in Kharkiv, they disappeared during the 2013-2014. And in 2015, a very important law was created and later implemented by the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, and that was a law on decommunization, and lots of communism monuments and names of the streets, of the squares, of the theaters disappeared really slowly, because many people were lazy and they did not like to change the names of their streets, because you have to go to various offices, you have to change things in your documents, in your registrations, taxes and so on. But slowly, step by step, many of someone is coming but slowly it all disappeared. Now you know that I film it with just one shot. There is one lady who speaks over the phone very emotionally, so please forgive that. So lots of these streets disappeared, and they got new names associated with Ukrainian history, or what I like even more, their old names were back, and During this revolution year, I guess more than 500 Lenin monuments disappeared. And there were other communist monuments, and what is even worse, what makes it uglier, many of them were dedicated to those leaders who were involved in Holodomor, genocide of Ukrainians in the 30s, in the 40s. So it was really important to erase them from the territory of Ukraine. And I do know that some people think, especially those who did not suffer communist occupation, that this is our history and we have to keep it. We can keep it in various museums, and there are museums of communist occupation, but it is not the place for monuments close to our Ukrainian leaders or European leaders or, I don't know, world leaders, but those people who helped Ukraine and not wanted to destroy Ukraine. And I do think that communism was, of course, one of the darkest regimes in the history of mankind, and it can be equated to the Nazi regime because the number of victims is even greater. I have read even Russian sources that state 60 million people or 85 million people, and definitely millions of Ukrainians and Georgians and Lithuanians and other people who were killed, executed, prosecuted, sent to Siberia, Sakhalin and other places where they were not able to survive. These are all victims of the communist regime. And if Nazi regime was stopped in 1945, Soviets lived until the 90s. And what is worse, when you think that like 80s were normal, no, they were not, because even in our Ukrainian culture, in our Ukrainian history, we do have victims of Soviet regime, even in the 80s, in the end of the 80s. Last people were executed in 1989, so just a year before the fall of the USSR. And in many countries, using the emblems of the Soviet Union and communist regime is forbidden, including my country, and I'm really proud of that, because just 10 years ago you could buy lots of Russian-like stuff in various souvenir shops in Kyiv, and I personally always hated that. I don't know, because it was definitely wrong, not only from the perspective of tourists, but also from the perspective of those who greet the tourists to sell them matryoshkas, for example, because matryoshka has never been a part of Ukrainian history, and I don't like this idea at all. And many people think it's not important. There are other things we can spend our money, because changing the name of your street or taking away the monument is not cheap. But when Russians came to our territory during this war, and there are some cities that are occupied by them, the very first thing that they do, they return the monuments of Lenin on the streets. And for example, in Novakakhovka, which is one of the cities now occupied by Russians, they have put Lenin back. And I have already told you that they still adore Stalin, and with every passing year more and more, even though he is a world-renowned dictator, tyrant, and a person guilty in the millions of deaths of innocent people. And that's why I do think that decommunization is an extremely important period in our history and the history of other countries that were poisoned by communism. And another step that is also important for my country and for other countries like Georgia, I think like Moldova, that is to get rid of Russian colonial influence, because many parts of our countries were inside Russian Empire, and there they were also treated as not equal. And there are lots of monuments, there are lots of streets named after Russian writers and poets who had no connection to the city, to the history of that part of the world at all. For example, in my city, Lutsk, we still have a street named after Pushkin, who is a famous Russian poet, who was actually very much Russian in his ideas about Caucasian nations, and he was involved in the depiction of their occupation, and he loved all of this great Russia stuff. But anyway, He never visited Lutsk. He never spoke about Lutsk. I give you 100% that he knew nothing about Lutsk, and he did not show much respect in his works to Ukraine. So I have a question, like, why do we have his street in our city? And we will change it very soon, because the processes are on already, and war is definitely fueling it all up. And to show you, like, I do understand we have streets named after deacons, we have streets named after some French writers, and I'm totally in support of this. But to tell you the truth, the number of monuments in Ukraine at the beginning of war, Shevchenko is our very famous poet, and there were like lots of monuments to him, and perhaps there are lots of monuments to him all over the world. But Pushkin was ranked second or what, and he never kinda was our national hero. He was always a national hero of Russia, and that is the example of this imperial policy. And of course, this is something we have to get rid of. I'm not saying we don't have to glorify and support great people from different corners of the world, including some Russians who were saying or doing normal things in support of peace and democracy in the world. But of course, it's nonsense when we had, just before the Maidan revolution, when we had so many monuments to people who were actually organizing genocide, who were killing thousands of Ukrainians all over Ukraine. And I hope this was interesting to you. Maybe I will show you a little bit of this building from inside to give you the glimpse of that Soviet heritage that we have here. And thank you for watching. Please inspire me with your questions. And if you like my vlogs, of course, subscribe. Slava Ukraini!